The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute here. Great. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have an hour for this presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Reyes. I'm an education equity specialist with the Oregon Department of Education. Thank you all for joining us in this webinar. We're hosting 2 today, so if you have colleagues that weren't able to make this session, but they're able to join us at 3, help spread the word. We're doing this presentation in partnership with Causa Oregon, Home is Here Oregon, and the Department of Education. I wanted to first start off that we planned this co-hosted webinar in anticipation of a pending decision by the Supreme Court. And as many of you all have known, the last 24 hours have been quite a ride as that decision finally came down yesterday from the Supreme Court. And it is a good decision, thankfully. And so our partners, our DACA will say more on that. But I'm happy to say that, this presentation will be able to offer more concrete answers because really up until yesterday, we didn't know which way it was going to go. So it was great to know that, we know the decision of the Supreme Court and we know how we can move forward for all of our students and DACA folks in Oregon. Go ahead, next slide, please. So we'll give a moment for our director, Cole Gill, to say a few words on behalf of ODE. And the bulk of this presentation is going to be folks from Causa Oregon and the Home is Here Oregon Coalition to talk about what this decision means and how you all can learn more and be of support. We'll open it up for Q&A, and then we'll share some resources that Oregon Department of Education has put together to support our community of educators across the state who want to be able to do more. Cole, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Michael. So I'll keep this short because I really do want to have the vast majority of this hour together for you to interact with the panelists and everything they have to offer and answer your questions as well. But I just want to thank you all for joining us. I really want to thank this partnership with Causa Oregon so that we can put this kind of information forward to everyone. And also just say that while the Supreme Court's action brought us some relief, we all know that this is far from a permanent solution. And so we still have work to do to support our students, families, and educators here in Oregon. I think that's really important that we're aware of that we need to celebrate, but we also need to know that we have more work to do to get to a final solution. We have more than 11,000 hardworking DACA recipients here in Oregon. And as we move forward, as a department at ODE, we're reaffirming our commitment to protecting the rights of our dreamers. We will continue to support districts and really help to redouble Oregon's efforts to ensure our schools and classrooms are safe, inclusive, welcoming, and respectful places for all of our students, their families, and our educators. And we mean that regardless of race, ethnicity, national origin, immigration status, or documentation status. So I'm glad you're here for the webinar, and I'm just going to stop right there so we can dig in. I'm going to stay for the entire time, so I'm happy to help answer questions later if I'm able, and turn it back over to Michael.
Great, thank you, Cole. So I'm just gonna pass on the baton to our friends at Causa. I'll let them introduce themselves. Take it away.
Thanks, Michael and Colt and everyone at ODE for the opportunity to have us here. My name's Adriana Miranda. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm the executive director at Causa. I also have with me our colleagues, Fatima Preciado, who's our field organizer and the manager of the Home is Here Oregon coalition, and Cindy, and they'll be introducing themselves a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. I will go ahead and introduce the Home is Here Oregon campaign. So to give you a little bit more context, the purpose of the Home is Here Oregon Coalition is to respond and coordinate around a SCOTUS decision on DACA. The Home is Here Oregon Coalition is led directly by impacted individuals and supported by community organizations, educators, legal service providers, labor unions, members of Congress, and other groups united to protect and empower undocumented, DACAmented, and the general TPS community. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the main organizations who have been leading some of the work for the campaign. So we've been meeting consistently since March, preparing for a Supreme Court decision. And these are some of the main groups that we've been coordinating with. As you know, you recognize maybe a few: Oregon DACA Coalition, Adelante Mujeres, Latinos Unidos para Siempre, and of course our partners with Portland Community College. They've been essential in doing our work. And now, Adriana, I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce the DACA program.
Thank you, Fatima. So as we, back in 2012, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program has allowed young undocumented immigrants in Oregon and across the country the opportunity to go to school, to serve in the military, to support their families, and to contribute to their workplaces without the immediate fear of being torn from the communities and sent away to places from the place they called home. The hope and promise were that DACA would provide immigrant families with some level of stability while Congress developed a long-term legislative solution that really created a path to citizenship for immigrants who've made the United States their home. When President Trump announced their intentions to end DACA on September 5th of 2017, he broke that promise. And since that day, we had been waiting anxiously to learn about what the future held for DACA recipients and their families, as well as those with temporary protected status. Next slide, please. So what is DACA? The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, is a policy in which the U.S. Department of Homeland Security would no longer be able to deport certain undocumented young people. Under DACA, these individuals would become eligible for a work permit, which is valid for 2 years at a time, gain temporary permission to remain in the United States, and have the opportunity to renew their work permit. In consequence, Causa has been incredibly successful in terms of providing temporary protection for individuals from deportation. It's allowed the opportunity to more than 700,000 people to work legally in the United States. Next slide, please.
Okay, so now we want to go over a little bit of what is not DACA. So if you click onto the next slide, we have 4 main bullet points about what is not the DACA program. So first, DACA is not a pathway to citizenship. DACA is only a temporary fix. Strong advocates argue that this is not a pathway to citizenship. It's not a permanent policy, and DACA does not provide a path to permanent residency. And I think we owe it to our DACistas a pathway to citizenship. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to kind of go over the DACA SCOTUS decision that was announced just yesterday.
Thank you. My name is Cindy Avila. My pronouns are she, her, ellas, and I'm a community organizer as well as an educator in the Hillsborough School District. So victory, we got the best case scenario within the 3 possible scenarios that we were unsure were going to come out, but SCOTUS has ruled that DACA is lawful and that the Trump administration did not have sufficient reason to terminate it. So this is making the revocation arbitrary, and the Trump administration can still try to repeal it, but they would need to have more sufficient evidence to do so. So we understand that this most likely will happen. But in the meantime, we are waiting for the USCIS to release the information for process of intaking new applications, and people who already have DACA may apply to renew it. So we are encouraging all of our DACistas to renew. And we're also offering clinics for those renewal workshops within our member organization collaboration that we have. Next slide, please. So just some facts on DACA. In Oregon, DACA has allowed nearly 11,300 young people to come forward, pass background checks, and live and work legally in the country. Nearly $2 billion is contributed by Dreamers to Social Security annually, and nearly 470 million is paid to Medicare by Dreamers every year, and up to $1 trillion has been added to the U.S. GPD over a decade in permanent protections for Dreamers that have passed. 96% of Dreamers are either working or are in school, or doing both. And 60% of Dreamers have purchased a vehicle, 14% of Dreamers have purchased their own home, and they pay an estimated $380 million in property taxes every single year. Next slide, please. So we understand that our undocumented community and our Dreamers are essential not only to the economic prosperity of our country, but also to the fabric of our society. And especially now during this pandemic, we know that there's a lot that's at stake for us here in Oregon, but also at a national level. We have some facts and figures in regards to what that would look like if the program, ever gets terminated, or if there's any impact to the Dreamers. It is estimated that DACA recipients are in the healthcare field. So we have about 43,500 healthcare workers, 21,100 operate in transportation and warehousing, and 32,800 are employed in retail trade, 14,500 work in the manufacturing sector, and 13,300 work in support and waste management services. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead and pass it over to talk a little bit about our vocalized support of our members in Congress.
Yeah, so thank you, Cindy, for the information that you provided on the SCOTUS decision. Like we mentioned, the Home is Here Oregon campaign is directly in coalition with members of Congress. So we've already had meetings with some of our members, and they've already vocalized our support and are standing in solidarity with the Dreamer community and the general undocumented community here in Oregon. So you may recognize some faces. We have representatives. We have both of our senators, Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley. So we're very thankful to have their support. And on the next slide, you can actually see their vocalized statements that was released yesterday when the Supreme Court made the decision, and we included this in Causa's press release statement when the decision came out. And we just want to know and inform our community that we are holding our leaders accountable, and we want them to make a promise of action. And so these are their direct words. And we can move on to the next slide to talk a little bit more about the goals of that campaign in general. So it's to spotlight what's at stake for over 700,000 DACA recipients. Number 2, expand and strengthen community educational and wellness efforts with student leaders, community organizations, and allies in support of Dreamers, TPS holders, and the immigrant community. Number 3, address a negative potential Supreme Court decision on the Dreamers and TPS holders and the immigrant community. And on the next slide, you can see a little bit more about our work. So these are the different working buckets that we have. It shows you a figure of just like the different components of the Home is Here Oregon campaign. So we have a wellness and emotional team. We have a legal team. There's also an education. labor employment group, and then we have a communications and narrative team, and lastly, our organizing and coalition team. Okay, so we want to jump over to educational resource ask, to that slide. Beth, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. Okay, so we want to keep our community safe at a time when we expect that immigration agents and many federal government officials may try to come into our communities. So we're requesting support for undocumented students and their families, such as 1, increase community support and have culturally relevant curriculum and training for educators and staff to address and aid undocumented students in K through post-secondary education. Number 2, change your school or campus to be a sanctuary or safety campus if it's not already. Number 3, reallocate the school resource officer program funding to create a task force to develop appropriate trauma-informed and culturally sensitive restorative practices. Number 4, demand and support local campaigns demanding that city, county, or state officials create sanctuary policies to keep residents safe. And 5, join the Home is Here Oregon Coalition for the support and advocacy of Dreamers. And if we move on to the next slide, I want to share with you some educational resources that we provided to some of the school districts that we've already met with. So the first document that we have linked here is the United We Dream Here to Stay Educational Toolkit. So this is a really important document. It talks about good practices that you can implement in your classroom as an educator around like safety, and also there's also information about what is DACA and what is immigration and what is the current state of it all, and it just provides more information for educators on how to interact with undocumented families and be more informed and be as helpful as you can. The second bullet point on there is Pathways to Scholarship Dreamers program, and this is a scholarship program that's been implemented at the PCC Rock Creek Dreamers Resource Center that is run by Doctora Luz. She provided this resource because it really shows a roadmap to higher education for undocumented DACA and TPS students, and it really shows them what is this. How do you write a scholarship, right? How do you get into college? What is the ORSA? It really teaches students a lot about what it takes to go to school and what are the steps, how to navigate higher education, especially if maybe you may not have that support at home. You can't talk to your parents about, hey, can we talk about writing a scholarship? If your parents can't provide that support, we have our educators, we have great programs already built in, but we want to make those better so that we're catering them to undocumented students. And lastly, we have the Oregon Immigration Resource page, which is a great community website. It's both in Spanish and English, and it talks about not only like what is DACA, but there's also information about how to go about renewing your DACA. So it has multiple organizations that are currently giving out DACA renewal scholarships, but it also has tips on how you can yourself renew your own DACA. It has steps on how you can fill out your DACA renewal on your own, and there's also resource on mental health, how to access free and reduced counseling. There's links to counselors that we worked with in the past and who are also DACistas and may identify with the immigrant community. So I would highly encourage you all to check those out. And if we go to the next slide, you can see some other just resources that are available for you all to access. They actually all have links. So, a couple I've already mentioned: Oregon DACA Coalition, PCC Dreamers Resource Center, Dreaming Beyond Borders Resource Center, which is over at OSU. We've also been in partnership with Pacific University, Office of Equity, Diversion Legal Services. They're actually putting on an event in a couple of weeks as well. So you'll be on the lookout for that on their website regarding, they're doing more DACA renewal workshops and informing the community on the SCOTUS decision. Just know that this is not a complete list. There are several organizations around the state that are actively engaging in actions and plans to support DACA recipients. These are just some of the few that we've compiled for you all. Great. And this one, I actually will turn it over to Cindy if you want to talk a little bit more about the COVID-19 impact on our communities.
Yes, thank you, Fatima. So as we were talking about what's at stake, we know that COVID-19 has an impact on all of us, but especially immigrants and refugees. And the HEROES Act, to take the individuals into account, also includes to provide free COVID testing, treatment and services for all, regardless of immigration status, cash payments, and expanded unemployment insurance must go to all people, including immigrants who pay taxes using their ITIN number. Automatically extend work permits for DACA recipients and TPS holders to ensure people have the stability and the ability to be safe, and end policies and practices that increase fear among immigrants and prevent them from accessing treatment or services, including the public charge rule and enforcement. The last bullet point is to invest more funds in emergency child care relief for families and care workers. So we know that when we're able to take care of each other and provide more equitable ways in which our families and all of our undocumented and immigrant communities can be safe, that really just sets the tone to ensuring that we all are able to survive and continue to navigate this pandemic collectively, but expand our civil liberties and justice work as we're doing that within our state. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Michael.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for sharing all those resources and tools. And at ODE, we're working on updating our own undocumented toolkit. It's a resource you can find online on the ODE website. And because the SCOTUS issue is so recent, and we've been working on this relatively recently, we want to get it updated with some resources so folks know where to connect, who to turn to, who are the organizations that that can go for support, for lesson plans, for history, and to places to guide your students. And so we'll be updating some of that. It'll include more background on DACA, an action guide. So again, folks know how to what are some of the next steps that they can take. We'll be providing communication samples. So if you and your schools, your districts want to send out your own communication, you have some things, some templates, some tools you can use there. Best practice for considerations for policy and practice. We mentioned earlier that it's helped when districts can reaffirm their own stance, and there's some good best practices from across the country. We can share some civil rights First Amendment educator guidance and lesson plans, and then many additional resources. So this will be updated very soon. We'll make sure that it's announced once those updates are made, and so folks can take advantage of those resources. It'll be a pretty comprehensive list, but we know in the coming weeks more resources will get added, particularly local resources in different parts of the state. As we've been asking our partners around the state to say, hey, if there's something local in your community in Eastern, Central, Southern Oregon, and the coast, if there's something you know about, please let us know, and we'll be sure to add it to this resource list, as sometimes the best resources for folks might be something in their own backyard. And so in terms of who to contact here at ODE for any resources, my colleague Beth Wiggum, who's been moving the slides forward, you can her email is listed there, as well as myself. We're happy to help get you connected to any of the resources and support from Oregon Department of Education. But definitely turn to our partners at Causa and Home is Here, especially for any local community-based resources as you're looking to, connect your students and families with what to do next. Because really, again, the decision was made yesterday, and now folks want to know, what is my next step? What can I do now? And at this time, we're really going to open it up to questions. So if you can use the question box here in the go-to to ask any questions, that would be great. Beth, we have one question already. Do you want to go ahead and read that one and then have our folks respond?
Yep. So one of the questions on there is, what does TPS stand for?
Mm-hmm.
I can answer that. Yeah, so it's temporary protection status, and it's slightly different than that. This has been offered to folks that come from Central America. It's also a program that offers no pathway to citizenship, and it's been in place for decades, longer than DACA.
Great. Other questions from folks? There's a question.
So another question has come in. It says, thank you for the presentation. Will we get a copy of the presentation so we can click into all of the resources?
Yes. I will make sure to follow up with a link to the presentation and other resources that we provided.
Yes, and we'll make sure those resources are also linked in the resource guide that ODE is working on as well.
Next question is, do you have any sense of when the window to renew applications will close?
So we've been in conversations with our legal partners at ACLU and some other resources. We anticipate that the window is going to be small. We don't know exactly yet. We haven't received final legal analysis, but we anticipate that it'll be a short window.
Another question is, what is the public charge rule?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. Public charge is slightly different than DACA. It's essentially it's a question that is asked when folks are going through their citizenship process, and it determines the way in which the government will have to assist a person. And basically it's a public charge question estimating if this person would need any support from a local government. Public charge was expanded back in, I think it was January or February, and it extended to additional public services that were not included before. So it's really a way to limit the amount of people that can become U.S. citizens.
Thank you. Another question that's come in is, do you know which school districts have already identified themselves as sanctuaries of safety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our team has done a school district power mapping Google sheet where we've kind of broken down the major school districts in Oregon. So for example, Portland School District, Beaverton School District, Hillsborough School District, Salem Kaiser. We've been working with some of the larger ones, but we also know that some school districts in like the Eastern Oregon area, more rural parts have not implemented sanctuary city policies. Like for example, Umatilla County, they have not passed that, and Causa's work has consisted of passing a lot of sanctuary policies and trying to implement that. But now our team of educators is going directly and meeting with school districts to figure out where they're at in that process of becoming a sanctuary city, and if we need to go in and hold meetings and put more pressure around that school district board to pass something like that. That's something that's in our campaign plan to do. I hope I answered the question.
Looks like another question has come in, and it's asking, is there any change in expected actions of police or INS related to student or family surveillance or intervention?
So those are some of the changes that we're working really in creating. It's a broader conversation. We're really hoping that there is change and that school districts really take the lead in really addressing the structural racism, especially around SROs. There's a lot of conversations happening across the state to divest the funding that is going to SROs and rather divest that into educational programs and outcomes for students. So that is a goal and that is a hope.
Just quickly.
And clarify
sorry.
what SRO is.
Is that Michael?
Yeah, I just asked to clarify what SRO is, in case folks are not familiar with that acronym.
Yes, so security resource officers is usually the police that get hired to be in schools.
Yeah, and I can share a little bit more. Homeless Here Oregon is working directly with Latinos Unidos para Siempre, which is an immigrant youth organization here in Salem, and we held an event yesterday outside of the Salem Kaiser School District building where we had direct immigrant youth share testimonies about their interactions with officers on campus. And we heard from brown, Black, Indigenous students, and we're asking for restorative justice. We're asking for more mental health resources. We're asking for more nurses. We're asking for more counselors in our schools instead of police.
Great, thank you. It looks like one of our panelists put a response in here to the previous question about whether school districts have identified themselves as sanctuary of safety. So Luce has put on here that she's a DRC coordinator, and she wanted to announce that PCC DRC web pages has a list of national and state community partners and other resources. And you can go to their website for PCC DRC and find that information there. She also mentioned that PCC is a sanctuary school and university, and so just wanted to let you know about that. And it doesn't look like any other questions have come in at this moment. Does anybody else, any other participants have questions?
Looks like we have another question here. And it's asking, can you outline the pathway to citizenship? What are the steps and possible timelines?
Gosh, it's a very complex question to answer. None of us are immigration attorneys, so this is not legal advice. But a pathway to citizenship can look various different ways. If you come in through refugee status, seeking asylum, status through a family or through marriage. I mean, it's a very, very complex system, and it's not one question that can easily be answered, unfortunately, and that's why we're in the situation that we're with this right now.
Adriana, this is Carmen. So one of the things that's interesting about this question is that there's a lot of myths, specifically in the community, that suddenly you can be, let it be by marriage, by family member, as you said, and suddenly you are, you start with a work permit and then you become a citizen the next day. And folks don't understand that it is maybe you have a work permit, then you become a legal permanent resident, that you have to be 10 years before you can even apply to citizenship. And every single phase is an investment of a huge amount of resources. So I feel that that really needs to be clear for our communities as they're thinking about this path to citizenship, that it's not, like you say, there's multiple, actually there's very few pathways to citizenship in the now, and that every single one of them, there's phases, and in every single phase, there's resources, money that communities have to be able to pay to ICE. So I just wanna frame that, and usually that pathway, many times it's up to 20 years for a family to be able to become a citizen.
Yes, Carmen, thank you so much for highlighting that. And also the emotional stress that goes behind it. One of the other things when families are in the process of citizenship is that a lot of the families are separated. Some families have to be sent back to their country and wait in their country up to 10 years. Sometimes it's a little bit shorter, sometimes it's longer. So it's also a mental and emotional burden that is placed on these families because of the way that this system was built.
Yeah, and I do want to say that the campaign and Causa in general is continuing to urge Congress to pass permanent protections and solutions that help people without hurting people. So we know that as Daquistas, we've been, used as political bargaining chips for this administration, and to put the lives of immigrant youth as a political tool is inhumane. And so we are demanding that Trump and UCIS immediately accept DACA renewals and new DACA applications and restore the DACA program to its original state before termination. That continues to be our ask to the community.
Thank you. It looks like another question has come in. Is this information being shared with colleges?
Yes. We have a plan to coordinate meetings very similar to this with school campuses, and we're also in partnership with Congress, and our state representatives they've actually vocalized they want to hold a town hall relating to education and higher education, and how we can go about restructuring and looking at our policies that better support undocumented students. So, the implementation of Dreamers Resource Centers, for example, is a big push that with my work at Dream PSU at Portland State, I've been leading a lot of that. And I've, because I've had mentors from PCC, and we see that happening at OSU, and we hope that it continues at U of O and Western Oregon and so on, and all the other universities around the state.
So is there any other questions from participants? I'm doing my educator wait time. If there's not any other questions from participants, what we'll do is we'll wrap up our presentation from today. Michael, do you want me to go ahead and hand it over to you?
Yeah, sure. Again, thank you everyone for participating today. And thank you to all of our panelists, our colleagues at Causa and the Home is Here Coalition, Cindy, Adriana, Fatima. Thank you everyone at Oregon Department of Education that helped make today's presentation possible. Beth Wiggum, Carmen, Colt. Thank you all. Again, we got a decision from the Supreme Court yesterday, and it was a good decision. It allows us to breathe a short sigh of relief, in this work, that we can continue to support our DACA recipients. But clearly there's more work ahead of us, because this is only a Band-Aid to a big problem, and we all need to continue to keep working hard to find permanent solutions. Again, we'll continue to share out information as more information is out there. Please feel free to reach out to us, especially if you have resources locally that you can share with us for your local community members. We're happy to add those to, to our information page. But with that, thank you all for participating today. Take care.
Much appreciation. Thank you, Causa.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.